Thank you all for joining us. Super excited with this illustrious panel of legal and AI experts. And we're really going to think about what's happening in AI today and how your compliance teams and your legal teams are going to help you out with that. So Joe and Dan, let's start with you. From the perspective of AI governance, what have been the approaches that your companies have taken, particularly in terms of like building with AI, and then how have your teams, the legal teams, guided and been involved in that process, including any policies you've rolled out?
Joe, why don't you go first?
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Nice to see you, and thanks to Vanta for having me and having us. So at Ironclad, we sort of thought about the use of AI in three different categories, I'd say, three different buckets. The first is just actually building with generative AI within our product, within our platform. And I just say, like, we'd handle these different categories differently. So for that, what we are really focused on is the legal team and the engineering team who are working with the product to really coordinate closely together and make sure that everybody's on the same page about what we can do within the regulatory framework, within our contractual language, and make sure we're all on the same page about just the principles of how we work with AI. And to that end, we also then generated a white paper that is about our AI governance schemes so that it's available for our customers so that they're aware of how we're actually using AI. Then the next bucket would be company-wide or team-wide use of AI tools, not embedded or integrated into the product itself, but just to further our business needs. And those are generally going to be governed by the language of our master services agreement or DPA with the company. So the legal team then is really making sure that we're operating within whatever obligations we have to our customers, and again, the regulatory framework. So there the legal team is really involved. And then the last piece would be any individual Gladiator's use of any AI tool that might be out there. And that's the one that can always feel hardest to get your arms around because you just can't scale an audit of that or anything. So what we did there was we rolled out a generative AI policy that gave our employees some guidance on how to use those tools safely and responsibly, which, I mean, it's a multi-page document, but it basically boils down to opt out of training the model if that's an option. Make sure that you don't feed any confidential, highly confidential, or restricted information into it, and that's based on our data classification matrix. And a big one for the lawyer on the team is make sure you double check its work because not all AI tools are created equally, and some of them are more reliable than others, and even the most reliable ones can hallucinate or make mistakes. So you need to have some human backstop there. So that's how we do it.
It's good. It's a good summary. Similarly to Joe, we look at it in buckets, but since we're not a B2B company, we have consumer products, it's really two buckets. And one is what are we putting out for products for users? And when I look at that, even though AI is a new technology, a lot of the core problems and issues are the same. It's privacy, it's consumer law, it's security, it's IP. And so a lot of what we try to do is embed with our team for each sprint cycle with our product engineering team to get a sense of what we're doing. So on that side, it's really real time. I think we're seeing now just kind of a glimmer of executive orders and EU regulations that are going to backstop and really spell out what we should be doing there. But in general, we try to stay ahead there by living real time. Now, I think the more challenging thing is the AI internal use. Our employees want to use things. If I tell them, give us 5 days to review, that is not a sufficient answer. And so what we started out with is not a policy, but a set of guidelines. When I look at policy, I want to see what's the regulation, and there just hasn't been a lot in this space until now. And so we came up with just common sense guidelines to start, and it really is, I guess the first one is approved use. Define what requires approval and what does not. Coding tools, well, if we're going to use those, let's figure out how we're going to use that. We're going to do kind of an open source check on the results of that, what content can go in. Now, I think it's easy to say no PI, no confidential data, but a lot of the tools we see a lot of our vendors pushing out, especially on the HR side, is enabling AI. So we have to go back and ask them questions of, okay, what model was it trained for opt-out? How is your security? Things like that. And then I think the last one is, for us, like transparency is a big thing at Quora in general. We're a very transparent company. But the idea is the AI going to sit there and produce a result that we can expect? And so really making sure whoever is submitting or using it knows what they're doing. And so we have our group that we work with, infra, security, legal, and our privacy teams, that when we get to kind of new spaces that people can come ask there. So we try to be permissive within rules. And I'd say for people, if you don't have an AI policy yet, I think it's pretty normal. I think a lot of people have been doing things, releasing guidelines. We don't have a committee because we don't want to slow things down. We already have a bunch of people working on these problems. But I'd say there's probably 3 reasons why you should be doing that right now. One, we're getting questions when we did our insurance renewal on what's your AI policy. If you're fundraising, the latest NVCA forms have a rep saying, tell us about your use of AI. Tell us you're not doing all these things in there. And lastly, your board is going to be starting to ask questions. I think now is a time to start putting together common sense policy. There's a lot of great stuff online. I don't think you have to go pay KPMG $200,000 to do it for you. But I think you can do it. And lastly, I'm a little worried by the end of this panel that I'm going to get a Vanta alert asking me to update my AI policy. So please start working on it.
Well, and I just tag onto that and say for B2B companies, you also are going to have lots of customers asking you what your AI policy is. And so in addition to everything you just said.
A follow-up here for Saya, who has the distinction of not being the lawyer on this panel. But obviously you work very closely with legal teams. I'm curious, how have you seen the cross-functional relationship between the security and compliance teams that you're on sort of work with the legal team? And we also just heard about auditing, like this use being like a real problem. Like how are you guys handling it and working with your sort of legal partners to accelerate like the understanding and governance of how we use all these tools?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. And thank you for having me on this legal panel as not a lawyer.
No,
markedly
please.
not a lawyer. I'll say that first and foremost. But I think there's a few considerations to be made. I mean, if you look at founded industries or technologies that are in use today, they're generally backed by longstanding founded laws, regulations, accepted certifications. And this generally makes the backbone of what is a good compliance program. Now, I think that legal teams and compliance teams need to always be in concert, need to be in some form of partnership, and I think that remains true even in this case. But with these sort of more founded industries and founded technologies, it allows them to have less overlap. In AI, and especially in the building of foundational models, we're not really afforded that luxury.
Yep.
There's a few considerations here, or a few things that can be talked about. So I think the first of which is regulation in general. Right now, regulation either doesn't exist or it's rapidly changing. We all know that it's coming, but it's not it's not really quite there yet. And I think that's something that we're all aware of and seeing now with the executive order coming out and with the EU AI Act. So I think these are considerations that have a very specific legal basis. And compliance teams need to take this sort of new regulation and be able to do internal application, but may not always understand or be able to directly communicate or distill this information. So I think what's important here is having this sort of unified partnership between a compliance team and a legal team, having them act in concert, the legal teams being there for the distillation of this information to be able to communicate that to a compliance team, and for the compliance team to write, rewrite, co-write policies, communicate that information internally, sometimes externally. And yeah, I think it's really important. This is a baseline that's continuously evolving. The industries in which this stuff is being used are growing every day. The effectiveness of the use of AI in the industries where it's applicable is growing every day. So this is becoming increasingly important. I think if you sort of take this regulation out of the door for a moment and you look at just the industries in which this is being used, this is another area that legal and compliance need to be in concert, in unity. we, especially as a foundational model builder, who our stuff may be used in organizations that are heavily regulated. Being able to take a look at what laws apply to those orgs, what certifications are expected for those organizations, and then working together between compliance and legal, doing this sort of comparison to create sort of really a new control framework, because we don't have one yet,
Right.
creating one ourselves, and basing these common controls on the uniqueness and the overlap in these varying industries, ensuring that we keep any controls that we're applying to be the strongest of the overlapping. So I think that's really where I sit with that cross-team collaboration. It's more important than ever right now.
So in the absence of some third party imposing the controls on us, you guys have developed your own set of controls to sort of help.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So it's essentially the development of a new common control framework, one that doesn't exist yet. I do know and I do believe that this will exist. We're seeing organizations like the Cloud Security Alliance. They have an AI working group right now. They're creating a cloud control matrix specific to AI, both foundational model development and the use of AI services. I'll be transparent. I'm actually co-chair on that committee.
Cool.
So yeah, that's coming, and I would encourage folks to keep an eye out for that.
Hot tip. Yes, join the CSA. As Saya mentioned, there's so much stuff happening. I mean, it seems like every day there's a new thing. The amount of written law wasn't written to cover AI use cases. I'm curious for Dan and Joe, how are you staying on top of this? And or do the day-to-day changes change at all how you guys are approaching things, or sort of like stay the course with what you're doing?
I'll go first this time. I think it really is an information overload. I think every article is AI. Anytime a state passes some regulation, it's a state, Maryland passed its own AI regulation. And you look at it and it's really just, hey, the state should start thinking about using AI. And so I think it's really an exercise of filtering down. And so a couple of resources I like is Hogan Lovells, a law firm on privacy, has a Monday memo. I consider it essential reading. It's every Monday, kind of what are the biggest developments in privacy. Obviously, a lot of AI overlap. Davis Red Tremaine has a great blog in AI. And then more entertaining is Superhuman.ai has just kind of what's going on. But I think a lot of it is kind of filtering down. And I think a lot of everything is thinking about your own company and your own use case. There's going to be challenges to model providers and all things, but how does that impact you? And so trying to filter down. But we do exec summary every quarter on AI regulation, and so we try to weave it in. And then the other thing I really implore my team is we can't really be good lawyers if we don't understand the technology. You're not going to be an expert, but listen to some podcasts, read some blogs, understand the difference between a LLM, a GAN, and a diffusion model, know the terminology so when you go talk to engineers and product people, you sound smart enough, but also that's going to help you start issue spotting. So I think that's a couple things. And then the last thing I always recommend is, if there's an industry group like Josiah has, that's great, but just forming small communities. I have a group of kind of like-minded GCs that I talk to regularly. It helps me shortcut a lot of times. How did you deal with this? What are you seeing out there? And try to encourage everyone. So, if there's there's a lot of people here, try to, meet a few people here and connect, because I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think using those external networks to filter out the useful information from all the noise is really important, because there is a lot of noise out there. I think it's an incredibly exciting time for all kinds of people, but like as a lawyer, as a nerd, I like just seeing this development happen. Sometimes it's frustrating because you don't know exactly where we're going, but it's also exciting to see law developing in real time. One thing I would add to everything Dan said is that we just also work really, really closely with the engineers who are building with AI within our company. So we meet with them on a regular cadence so that we are sharing a lot of information about what is coming up and what they're using and whether it fits. And they're reading a lot of white papers and they're reading it all too. So we're trying to stay up to speed together and make sure it's not, a quarterly catch-up at all. We're talking every couple of weeks we have a standing meeting, and maybe more than that if a lot's going on, we'll have ad hoc conversations. So just having a really closely embedded relationship is really important.
So I have a quick follow-up for both of you on this. There's a question I've gotten a fair bit. Has outside counsel been at all helpful to either of you in understanding any of the AI-related? I can tell by the looks on your face you're going to answer I would, but
I think over time, I think when we first started, it wasn't there, and I think the idea you're going to go to one counselor and you're going to solve your issues is not realistic. And so how do we triage and say this is a privacy issue, this is a consumer disclosure issue, and then I think there's help. But I think this idea there's one person saying come in and solve it isn't there. But I think a lot of it is developing our CEO said he's never spent more time with his legal team than he has in the past year, because I get 1 hour with them every Wednesday to go through everything.
Yeah, I think, the best use of outside counsel so far from my perspective is exactly what Dan just said, is because a lot of these firms are global, and because they're covering the issues on a global scale, you can really rely on them to let you know when there are changes in the international framework.
Yeah. Cool. Syed, so, Anthropic, obviously provider of a lot of the underlying technology that we're all using. How do you all think about the basics of AI risk management? And how should all the companies in the audience here start thinking, if they're just getting started, they don't have AI risk management program, how should they get started? How should they think about getting that going?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I think there's sort of a couple of silos that are worth talking about here. A lot of the time when I speak, I talk directly from the foundational model perspective. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and I'll still mention that, but also talk about building with AI. So the way that we consider risk management as a model builder, as a foundational model builder, is a couple of facets. So one is protecting the model weights, not only because this is obviously valuable IP, but also a dangerous asset. It's something that if someone were to get a hold of, that could be problematic, not only for our organization, but potentially the world. So I think we have a very different sort of look there as far as protecting the things like model weights. When you talk about training and you talk about sort of those topics, it's all about harm reduction. So how can we do what we're doing in the safest manner possible? How can we ensure that our technology doesn't output something harmful? It doesn't assist in harmful activity. This is sort of first and foremost in our mind. Going towards building here, really look at what model you're using or where that model is being sourced from. Whether you're using a founded model like Anthropic, or maybe you're using a small independent domain-specific language model put out by another organization or maybe a niche company. Really try to understand what's the mission of that company, how is the information being trained, what information are they training on. I think it's really important to understand not only the technology but the heart of the org. I think we've seen multiple times throughout history when someone wasn't exactly what they let out to be. So I think that's an important consideration. And if you're using smaller models that maybe are more flexible or don't have as much harm reduction, those are responsibilities that you need to take on yourself. So looking at sanitizing the inputs from your users, looking at maybe reading the completions and doing some post-processing on that prior to shipping those results to an end user. These are all really important things. So I think that's really what is most under consideration. After that, we could get fairly technical and look at the infra, but I think at this top level, it's really paying attention to the outputs, making sure the outputs are not harmful. It's harm reduction top to bottom.
Got it. I'm curious for all three of you quickly, have you all seen the NIST AI risk management framework, and are you using it or sort of looking at potentially adopting it? I'm curious if you have any points of view on that one.
Pass down to you. No?
I'll start. I mean, it's one of the things, I think it was one of the earlier things released stats. I think it's a good way to frame things, but I'm, mostly focused on kind of regulation and many things. So it's a source of input, but I think a lot of things are just sources of input right now.
Yeah, I would echo that. We are looking for so many ways to create a framework, and so that's a good one, but not the only one.
Not the one you're like hyper kind of focused on. Yeah.
I like that it exists. I think that it's interesting that NIST has put this out. I mean, in terms of AI tenure, it's a bit old now, and a bit vague. But I see that there's a desire to put controls in place, that there's a desire to put regulation in place. So I guess I appreciate that about it. And I do use it instead, but there's not a lot of detail.
Right.
So I think it could use some additional detail.
Well, when this common control framework comes out, then everybody can just use that. So last question for each one of you. Joe, we'll start with you. We're coming upon the new year. I'm curious, like, what is the one issue you have really top of mind for next year in AI? And what, perhaps your advice for the audience on kind of like, if they had one thing to focus on, like what should that thing be?
Oof. Well, I won't go back to what is the regulatory framework going to be, because we have kind of covered that. I'm interested, though, to see whether or not that's going to get ironed out next year, or, there are lots of other times, like digital accessibility is an example where, like, we've been waiting for a real framework there for a very long time, and so who knows what'll happen here. But for me, as the risk-averse lawyer that I am, what I'm really focused on with AI is having more confidence in the output, and just having features that allow me to check its work and get confident about it. We rolled out our own AI chatbot this fall, and it does show its work, and that is really important to me. So that's kind of where my head is most of the time. All of these things are really important, but just being confident and secure in AI is a big piece of it for me.
Dan?
If I had one practical tip for everyone, I'd say you have lots of vendors and partners that you have your data. Your clauses are probably not sufficient to prohibit them from training and reselling your data. And so we've done an exercise to look back and limit that and just give a thought. I think there's going to be a real desire for real-time data and financial data, and so thoughtful there. But if I have one thing that keeps me up at night, it's video generation. I think there's already a few startups out there that do incredible things with a few clicks, and I think it's great for creators. It's going to create amazing content, but I also think we're heading to election cycle. Also to company, what is the desire for bad actors to create things with your CEO, with your product, and what is the world going to look like a year from now when these tools are out there? And so very curious how we safeguard that.
Saya?
Yeah, I think it's sort of three pieces. For me, it is controls. I can't not say that again. I think it's incredibly important. I think it's scaling responsibly. It's something that we've committed to, and that we're very closely monitoring, and safety in general. So, and these sort of all come in tandem. So the reason that I bring up controls again is without appropriate controls, organizations aren't encouraged to be safe, and some may try instead, but it's important. Responsibly scaling a model, understanding what's happening, and only choosing to continue development, alongside some marketed, pieces of measurement, I think is really important. These are sort of what's top of mind for me.
Cool. Well, we're through all of our questions, but we have 5 minutes. So anything any of you want to say to the audience, or we can end early.
Does the audience have any questions?
Oh no, we're throwing it open to the questions. All right. Any questions for the lawyers? We probably can't answer most of them, but we can probably take a couple.
I got one. So, Dan, building on what you just talked about with Gen
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion of watermarking, right? And is that an effective thing? I think obviously for bigger tools that maybe are Anthropic size, but there's just like explosion of startups. So I don't know technically, and Josiah, if you have any input there, I'd be interested, but I don't technically like if we're gonna be able to control, but I do think authenticity does stand out. I'll just give like an analogy. I used to work at OpenTable, and we did this test where we looked at all the photos everybody ever uploaded. And the ones that scored most for user sentiment and likability was not the professional photo. It was the photo someone took on their iPhone. And so I think there's still this sense of authenticity stands out, especially when there's just an explosion of AI-created content.
Yeah, any thoughts? Or maybe you can't talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any thoughts on that in particular.
Yeah, any question we get, at least half this panel is going to be disqualified from answering it. So, all right, well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you to our panelists.